Hello, welcome back to BLENDERSUSHI Live Noding. In this episode, I'm gonna do a quick one. I'm gonna take a look at this new nodes called Vector Reroute. And actually, not Reroute, it's actually Rewire. So I always get those two confused. They're still new, but this is Reroute and this is Vector Rewire. And what does this guy do? It's actually quite a simple node, but it does something pretty cool. I quite like it. This is a Sverchok Vector Rewire. So that's reroute, that's rewire. I'm gonna soon do something with it. Basically, this guy can rewire the data value for any kind of data that's using XYZ. So the most easiest one that I actually, if this is your first time using Sverchok add-on in Blender, the first thing you want to do is to Shift A and then generators, and then select one of these nodes and try to figure out what this does. Start from line, okay? And it just it crashes Blender just now, but that's not what the node does. But anyway, this is part of the experience. Let's just restart it real quick. That's because I didn't restart my Blender before I started this recording. I think that's always the case, but I always save every few seconds, so don't worry. Vector Rewire, and this is a reroute. I'm gonna try to use both. Okay, like I said, start with generators and start with line. With this guy, we know that if we use a viewer draw, we're gonna generate line. And by default, most of the generators kind of make the outputs. Sometimes it goes in the x-axis, sometimes it goes up, depending on what you're using. Line actually kind of grow in the x-axis. That's just the points, right? If you want the edges, you just plug the edges into this guy and then you get the viewer draw. Remember that you have two options. Once you generate something, you can bake it and it's become a real object, or you use like bmesh, viewer bmesh, and that will generate a real object right away. So yeah, back to Vector Rewire. In the past, I'm always doing, in order to make this line kind of growing in the z-axis or the y-axis, I always kind of need to do this. Vector out, vector in. I do this all the time. So we know that if we look at the data, I'm gonna show it to you what's the vertex points is actually doing. 0, 0, 0, 1, 0, 0. The one that's growing is the x. The rest of the value is just 0. So we can just simply plug that in, rewire the x into the z, and then put it there. And then now it's kind of growing in the z-axis. If you want it to grow in the y-axis, just pipe it in like that. Sometimes you want to do it in the two axes. Like if you want to make it in the, let's say, x and the z, and you should get something that's kind of diagonal. See, this is x-axis, that the z-axis going up. Sometimes you want to do this, and then depends on what you're doing. So you need to use a vector out and vector in. But since we have the vector rewire now, we can do this much simpler. You simply plug that in. This is a vector. Vertices goes into the vector, and then this guy can rewire it. We know that line grows in x, so this guy goes into x, rewire it into the z-axis. Now we get the line that goes up. Very cool, very easy, very simple. If you want, I just gonna duplicate this guy and then rewire x into the y, and we have that guy going in the y-axis. If we make it x to x, it goes back to where it was yeah, so that's pretty much it. It's really simple, but we can use it on many other generator nodes. So this is definitely super basic, but if you use this for the first time, it's really handy. So let's say we are using plane. For the plane, by default, have a look. Plane, okay, it's making that single phase. So okay, we can see sort of growing in the X and Y plane, because it's a plane. What if we rewire this guy? What's gonna happen? Look at this. Let's hide the line. X to Z, so it's kind of changing into the axis. Actually, for this, you can kind of just give it try and error. You know, this is the default. Next and next. Very nice, very handy. There is actually one more option called scalar. This guy can kind of assigning a value into this guy, if I'm not wrong. Say, so we scalar to Z or scalar to X or to Y. We can actually use two of this guy. Let's say we are wiring it X to the Y, X to the Z, for example, and then once we do that, we just gonna use the scalar into the X. This is what's happening. So you can just push it this way. Super handy. In fact, there's a Blender trick you can use. You can use the drop down, but if you want to do it really quickly, Control Shift and then scroll. Control Shift and scroll gonna work. Let's do it here. X is the value that's kind of changing. So turn this to 0. X to X, X to Y, X to Z. In this case, it doesn't really change the axis, but you can kind of, I think you can rewire it different way until you get the one you like. That's with the plane. I like to use example line, but I like to use cylinder as well. Cylinder is very easy. By default, cylinder grows in the z-axis. So that's the default. It has 32 vertices. If I increase the height, it grows in the x-axis. It grows up in the z-axis. Now if we kind of rewire this guy, just simply duplicate that node. You see, it's a super simple node, but super handy. X rewire to Z, X rewire to Y, and we can just Control Shift and then, you know, pick the direction you want. Normally it's X and the Z. It really depends. Some nodes kind of doing it differently. Scalar doesn't work yet, but if you do this, that's kind of working. You just need to be careful with this guy because it's actually flatten it. It's flatten one of the direction or flatten both of the directions. Yeah, just handy, but it's just for you to change the directions of vector. Let's say you use a donut, for example, torus. We don't actually have torus. Let's say circle. Okay, circle. You want a donut, you can have skin modifier, but that's another story. So by default, circle kind of sitting on the XY axis. The direction is in the Z kind of. So let's say we rewire this. So X to X. Okay, X to X give you that. How about Z to Z? Give you a flat one. Okay, Z to X actually. Gonna change it. to x-axis, z to y, changes to y-axis. So you need to know which value that's kind of growing. Okay, you can check it using the stethoscope. Check the points and which one is value that's growing. Or in this case, the value that's actually 0, 0, 0, that's the, which is the z. It's kind of weird, but z, and then you use Control Shift and then just drag this which direction you want. This is super handy, really handy. And let's see what this guy can do, this little one. Let's say you want to make use a matrix in location, scale, rotation. Let's say you want to scale it using the transform somehow instead of using the radius. Say using vector in, plug into that guy, so you can you can scale it in the what axis. Okay, like that. Totally up to you. But you can wire if you have a single value like float. Instead of having to do this every time, you can use this little guy. It's called this is the reroute. Plug that in and make that connection. So this guy can be super handy for that. Next time you need to plug into this tree guy, you just cut this and then plug that in, just like that. That's a reroute, that's rewire. It's a similar kind of term. Okay, and of course if you want to make something funky here, you can use let's say random number generators. Plug that into this guy. Look at this, really fancy stuff. See, how is this possible, It's becoming kind of easy to do this. It's pretty amazing. Let's say you want also, you can use a range float to do that. Range float. Count. How many counts? A small circle and a bigger circle. You have control over those things. And of course you can still control the radius and the number of vertices in here. Yeah, a lot of fancy stuff, but basically for this one, just the vector rewire and then this little guy reroute thing can be super handy. This guy somehow just now it stuttered Sverchok a little bit, or stuttered Blender. Anyhow, so yeah, if you're a beginner and this is the first time you use Sverchok, really you should look into this and then try each one of these. If you don't know what it does, how you use it, check for the documentation or check for Sverchok GitHub. Just type in the name of the nodes. Cylinder, sphere. Actually, we can actually use sphere as well, and this is super handy. So instead of circle, we use sphere now. And by default, the sphere, look at the axis. By default, it's doing this. Actually, that's not the default. By default, it's facing, say the center point is facing the Z. But once you rewire the Z into the X, into the Y, you get this kind of pointing to the Y axis, the world axis. If you change it to X, it's changing to X, and that's super handy. Once you if you just rotate the axis of the generated mesh, it's kind of change your perspective right away. Normally you don't look at the sphere this way, right? It's always pointing up. You need to rotate it and then do stuff. But with this guy, Vector Rewire, you get this, pretty easily. I think Sverchok is missing the donut. If you want the donut, if you really want the donut, you can have the donut. Circle and skin modifiers. gonna do the magic. Skin modifier. I have another video before that, kind of using this. There's also another way you can do this, but skin mesher can give you a torus. It looks like a sausage right now. Circle. Let's see. I can control the radius. Let's check what's going on. By default, we get that. And then rewire, we get that. We don't get the proper skin modifier. This could be anything. Maybe there's something funky going on here. So XY is fine. X to Z is a bit funky. Maybe I need to flip it somehow. Flip the normal. But we can change the radius here, which is I quite like. Turn it into disk. This is a little bit funky. If I try vector out and vector in, so the X to the Y. Trying to rewire this guy properly. So X and the Z and the Y. That's kind of fine. X to the Y, Y to the X. X to the Z, however, giving us this. Very interesting. Something to think about. If I actually bake oh, it's stuttering a little bit. I don't know why. Maybe it's time. Yeah, I think there is something funky here going on. But anyhow, that's pretty much it for this live noding. If you have any question, let me know down below. That's how I would use Vector Rewire. And yeah, hopefully this is useful.